You've heard about a linked list and that it's very flexible for working with data, and it uses head and tail pointers, and so the memory doesn't have to be contiguous. And so that's really quite efficient, and it can make working with that data faster. But let's see how it compares to using a list when it comes to inserting data and it comes to adding elements. So let's go ahead and click File, New Project. And we're going to do a .NET framework, and let's call this one linked list versus list sample. And we'll leave the framework the way it is. Click OK. We want an empty MVC, and it's going to create our project for us. And let's go ahead and go create a controller. Right mouse click, add controller, and it's going to be an empty controller, and we're going to call it home controller. Now within this controller we want to create a list and a linked list. So let's come into our index method and let's create a list first, and we'll just say that it's going to be of type int, and we'll call it list numbers, and we'll go ahead and instantiate that by saying new list int parenthesis, and then let's go ahead and create a linked list while we're here. And we'll also use the int data type, and we'll call it linked numbers equals new linked list of type int, and we'll instantiate it. So now we have our two variables that we're going to work with. So now let's go ahead and create what we call a stopwatch variable. So the class is actually called Stopwatch, and we'll call it Stopwatch and create a new Stopwatch constructor, and it says I'm not really sure who you are, so let's click on the down arrow and let's use the systems diagnostic, and that will bring that class in for us to make a stopwatch. And the stopwatch will allow us to say start and stop and what's the difference. So let's do the following. Let's go ahead and say stopwatch.start, and that starts our stopwatch. And then we're going to have a loop that says for int iCount equals 0, and let's go ahead and perform that loop for, let's do 10 million times. And then we'll increment iCount. And what we want to do in there is we want to say list numbers dot add, and we'll just add the counter because it's an int. And then once we add it all, let's stop the stopwatch. So we'll say stopwatch dot stop, and now we'll be able to determine how much time has elapsed. And the way we're going to do that is let's go ahead and store it to the view bag. We'll say view bag, and let's call it results, and you can call it anything you want. View bag just says what's the key name, and it can be anything, and we're going to say view bag is equal to, and we'll do the stopwatch variable dot elapsed, and that will tell us the difference between our start and our stop so that we have an amount of time. Now the other thing I want to do in here though is I want to make it HTML, so I'll go ahead and add a p tag, and then at the end of this I'll do a closing p tag. And the other thing I want to do is right here, I'm going to drop it to the next line, but I'm going to say list time difference for ads. And then we're going to add that, or concatenate that. I'll drop it down so you can see it. We're concatenating that with the stopwatch time elapse. So we're going to see, what is the difference for when we do the ads, and see how much time it takes. Now that we have the stopwatch in place for all the ads, let's go ahead and do the same thing for our linked list. So I'll go ahead and copy this code, and I'll just paste it here. And we're going to do that same code, and this time instead of the list numbers, we're going to use the linked numbers, which is our linked list. And instead of add, we're going to say add last, and we'll put I count. So it's sort of like a list. It just says go to the last element and add. And we'll do the same thing. And then I want to go ahead and add to the view bag. And we'll say this is now the linked list time difference. So I'm just going to change that, and it does the stopwatch elapsed again. So we can see the difference between an add for a list and an add for the stopwatch. Let's go ahead and create our view. Right mouse click, add view, index. And that's how you work with the linked list. You just create the variable and do an add last. And that just puts it at the end of the list. Now, if you don't want it at the end of the list, you can put it anywhere. But we're just going to use that add last for right now. And then here I'm going to say @HTML.raw. And we're going to specify string. And we're going to say our viewBag.results. And I can't remember if it was result or results. And it was results. So let's run that and see if there's a difference between the list for adding and the list for the linked list. I'm sorry, the linked list for adding and the list for adding. And we run our application, and it's thinking out there, and I'll come back in just a minute. And don't you know I made a mistake, because all I see is the linked list. Now, why is that? Because when I came back over here to my controller, I should have concatenated the results onto the viewBag results. Otherwise, it just wipes it out. So let's run it one more time, and hopefully this time we'll see the difference between the two, between the adds of our list and the adds for our linked list. So when we take a look at this, if we're just doing a bunch of adds to a list is going to be a lot faster than doing a bunch of adds for a linked list. So that implies if you're going to be doing a bunch of inserts, or maybe inserts with the list of data, you'd want to use a linked list rather than a list. But a lot of that is going to depend on your system, your memory, processing, a lot of factors. So have fun with lists and linked lists.